My name is Emily Carter. I'm 31 years old and a full colonel in the United States Army. Tomorrow morning, I'll be walking into a Pentagon-level defense contract meeting with the power to halt or greenlight a multi-million-dollar rollout. But tonight, I'm pulling into the same narrow driveway I left behind 9 years ago, back when I was just the disappointment who didn't follow the family script. The house still looks the same, even though time hasn't done it many favors. The siding is duller now, the porch light dimmer, but the feeling in my chest hasn't aged a day. It's that heavy silence you wear when you know you're walking into a room where your name means less than your absence. I turned off the engine and let the heater fan fade to a hush. For a moment, I stared at the house, my hands still on the wheel, the same way I used to grip my steering column on base before a classified briefing. Military calm, that's what they call it. But this wasn't a war zone, not technically. It just felt like one. The front steps creaked beneath my boots, and the same chipped welcome mat greeted me like it hadn't judged me last time either. I rang the bell even though I didn't have to. That old habit of following protocol sticks with you, especially when no one's expecting you to outrank the room. My mum's voice floated from the kitchen. "It's open." No hug, no footsteps, just 3 words that made me feel like I was 12 again, sneaking in late after practice. I stepped inside, and nothing had moved. The photos on the wall still captured every shining moment of my brother's Rise graduation wedding kids, but not a single frame of me in uniform, not even the one I sent after commissioning. I told myself it didn't matter, but it still stung. The kitchen smelled like rosemary roast, same as every Sunday when I was growing up. My mum stirred something on the stove with her back to me and mentioned Logan's newest promotion like it was a weather report. She didn't ask about me. She never does. I gave a polite response. "That's great, Mum." But inside my chest tightened. She talked about his leadership at the company like he'd discovered electricity. Systems integration lead for the very defense contract I now oversee. I bit my tongue and nodded. Let them have their story for tonight. Tomorrow, their boss will call me Colonel Carter in front of every executive they've ever tried to impress, and the silence in that room will be the loudest sound they've ever heard. I took my seat at the table, not that it mattered where. The places were unmarked, but the roles were fixed. Logan always gets the head of the table, Dad takes the right, Mum flutters somewhere in the middle, and me, I occupy that quiet corner of the evening reserved for polite indifference. Dinner was a performance. Logan spoke like a TED Talk, charming and well-practiced, casually mentioning military strategy as if he were the one charting it. My father listened with the kind of proud intensity that used to make me jealous. I stopped trying to compete for it years ago. When my mum finally turned to me, her smile was gentle but hollow. Still moving around with the army, I sipped water and gave the same vague answer I always do. More or less. My father didn't look up. "Still a captain?" he asked. I nodded. Something like that. I didn't elaborate. I didn't need to. My uniform was folded in the suitcase upstairs. Rank insignia, polished ribbons perfectly aligned. Tomorrow they'd find out just how wrong they were. After dinner, I slipped away to my childhood room. The quilt on the bed was the same patchwork one my grandmother made when I was 10. The walls still held my high school awards, like time had stopped the moment I left. What was missing said more than what remained. No medals, no deployment citations, no proof I ever became more than the girl who chose the army over Westbridge Technologies. I sat on the edge of the bed, looking around the room like I was visiting someone else's life. It was strange how a place could feel familiar and foreign all at once. They never took down the photos, but they never added any new ones either. I wasn't erased. I was paused like they were waiting for me to come back and apologize for being different. But I'm not here to apologize. I'm here to do my job. And tomorrow, when I walk into that briefing in uniform with a seat at the head of the table and final authority over the project they've poured their pride into, I won't be thinking about revenge. I'll be thinking about presence, about clarity, about what it means to finally be seen, not for who they thought I should become, but for who I chose to be. Tonight they still think I'm the daughter who lost her way. But tomorrow I will become the woman who approves of their future. And they won't see it coming until it's already done. The roast beef was carved with precision, like everything else my mother prepared when Logan came home. She hovered with the same pride she used to reserve for spelling bees and soccer trophies, except now it was all for his titles and achievements. Logan took the head seat without hesitation, like it had been waiting for him all this time. He started talking before anyone asked, launching into a recap of his team's work at Westbridge, like a keynote speaker warming up a friendly crowd. My father leaned in, nodding with a smile that felt rehearsed. His fork paused mid-air, like Logan's words were more nourishing than the food. Even Mum chimed in with soft agreement, asking questions that gave him chances to brag a little more. I sat 3 chairs down, close enough to hear every detail, but far enough to feel the distance. No one asked where I'd come from this time. No one mentioned my rank or asked how my work was going. Just the same vague line about the army delivered like an afterthought. When Mum finally turned toward me, it was with a tilt of her head and a polite smile. Still travelling a lot with the army? She asked like it was a side hobby I hadn't let go of. I nodded, offered a soft yes, and glanced at the clock like maybe time would move faster if I didn't look at their faces. Logan was talking about performance bonuses and satellite integration models, now using words they didn't understand but applauded anyway. He spoke with that easy charm that makes even empty ideas sound important, and they ate it up. I wondered if they would listen to me with that kind of attention if I'd taken a job in finance. Dad barely looked my way, except to offer another casual jab. Still a captain. Just following orders, right? I smiled the kind of smile that holds back more than it shares, and took another bite of mashed potatoes. I didn't correct him. Let them enjoy the illusion for one more night. What stung wasn't their pride in Logan. It was that they didn't even see me enough to compare. I wasn't the sibling who took a different path. I was the one who disappeared from the narrative altogether. And I'd learned long ago that trying to insert myself into that story only made the silence heavier. So I let them talk. I let Logan finish his speech, and Dad poured the wine, and Mum beamed like the family was whole. I sat still, listened, nodded at all the right moments, and said almost nothing, because I knew tomorrow I wouldn't need to say anything at all. I pushed open the door to my old room and felt something shift in my chest. The air smelled like the same linen detergent my mum always used, a scent that clung to the past more stubbornly than dust. The light switch clicked like it always had, and suddenly I was 16 again, standing in a time capsule designed to never change. The bed still had the patchwork quilt my grandmother sewed the summer before my junior year. Trophies lined the shelves, little golden figures frozen mid-sprint next to framed certificates with curling edges and fading ink. My high school honours were all still here, perfectly preserved, like that version of me was the only one worth remembering. I walked to the dresser and opened a drawer out of habit. It held old report cards, SAT prep books, and a letter from the state university I never attended. The army acceptance letter wasn't there. My commissioning photo was never framed. It struck me quietly, not as a betrayal, but as a silent erasure. On the corkboard above the desk, there were snapshots of me and Logan at science fairs, me in my debate blazer, and me holding a scholarship plaque. All the milestones that fit the path they understood. There were no campaign patches, no badges, no indication that the girl in those photos had grown up to hold the rank of colonel in a room full of generals. I sat on the edge of the bed, my fingers tracing the stitching on the quilt, each square holding a memory they chose to keep. But everything about who I became had been edited out like the story stopped the moment I chose something they couldn't picture. I wasn't angry, just quietly aware of how thoroughly I'd been left out. It wasn't that they didn't love me, it was that they loved a version of me I no longer was. And that version still lived here, in honour rolls and basketball medals, untouched by deployments, resilience, or classified briefings. The room wasn't hostile, it was just frozen. A shrine to the person they understood, and a silence for the one they didn't. I stood up slowly, glanced one last time at the shelf, then turned to my suitcase. My uniform was folded with care, insignia gleaming beneath the soft glow of the bedside lamp. That fabric held every part of me that this room had forgotten, and tomorrow it would speak in a language they could no longer ignore. The parking lot was already half full when I pulled into the space marked Department of Defense Liaison. The morning sun hit my windshield at just the right angle to catch the gleam of the eagle insignia on my uniform. I stepped out slowly, adjusted my collar, and felt the weight of the moment settle on my shoulders, not heavy, just real. As I walked toward the main entrance, heads began to turn. People in tailored suits paused mid-stride, conversations dipped, and a few backs straightened instinctively. It wasn't about intimidation, it was about presence, and I had trained my entire adult life for this kind of quiet command. The security guard at the front desk scanned my badge, his posture shifting the moment he saw the credentials. "Morning, Colonel." His voice was crisp-clipped with respect, the kind of greeting I had never heard within the walls of my own family home. I nodded, thanked him, and moved toward the elevators. I knew the layout by memory. Weeks of briefings, prep sessions, and digital walkthroughs had made sure of that. No hesitation, no need for signage. I stepped out on the executive floor like I belonged there because I did. Logan was the first familiar face I saw. He stood by the window, scrolling through his presentation tablet, blazer-fitted posture relaxed. For a moment he looked completely in control until he saw me. His eyes flicked up, then widened. "Emily. What are you?" He didn't finish the question. His gaze dropped to the silver on my shoulders and stayed there. I didn't stop. "Good morning, Mr. Carter. I'm here for the Sentinel Project review." I moved past him with a professional nod, the sound of my boots echoing off the polished floors. Then I heard my father's voice. He was mid-conversation with two other executives down the hall, his laugh familiar but laced with formality. When he saw me, the conversation stopped cold. His eyes locked on the uniform, then flicked to my face, unsure if he was misreading the situation. "Emily, what's going on? Why are you dressed like that?" Before I could answer, Lorraine Hart, the CEO of Westbridge, stepped around the corner. She froze for half a second when she saw me, then broke into a smile. "Colonel Carter, I didn't know you'd be attending in person." Her voice rang with genuine warmth and just enough volume to draw attention from everyone nearby. I shook her hand firmly. "I was in town. Thought it would be best to observe the review firsthand." "Absolutely. Your input always sharpens the room." She turned to the group that had now gone completely still. "For those of you who haven't had the pleasure, this is Colonel Emily Carter. She's the Pentagon liaison for Project Sentinel and holds final approval authority for all military components of the initiative." The air in the hallway shifted. There was no applause, no dramatic music, just silence. Dense, undeniable silence. I didn't look at Logan or my father. I didn't need to. Their faces said everything. Confusion and realization, then the slow, dawning understanding that the narrative they built didn't match the truth standing in front of them. Lorraine motioned toward the boardroom. "Come, Colonel. Your seat is prepared." I followed her, in every step quiet but deliberate. At the head of the table beside her chair, a placard already waited with my name and title printed in clean block letters. No one had to say a word. My presence did all the speaking, and for the first time, I didn't feel the need to be heard. I had already arrived. The room settled fast once everyone realized who I was. Engineers adjusted their notes. Executives straightened in their seats. Lorraine opened the session with a nod in my direction, thanking me for attending in person and highlighting the value of my oversight. I returned the nod, stood, and walked to the front. My briefing was clear and tight. I outlined the current progress, highlighted areas of concern, and made it clear what benchmarks would determine the next release of funding. Every sentence landed. Every detail was intentional. When I finished, I sat down and opened the floor for questions. One by one, project leads chimed in, giving updates, requesting feedback, and clarifying their deliverables. I listened, responded, and redirected where needed. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. My rank wasn't what made them quiet. It was the precision. Eventually, it was Logan's turn. He stood slowly, tablet in hand, eyes darting toward me for just a second too long. As systems integration lead, he began, "I've developed a new rollout strategy for Phase 2. His voice was steady, at first confident even. Then he started outlining his model, and I caught the flaw instantly. He referenced latency targets without tying them to the Pentagon's last memo thresholds. It was a mistake, a technical oversight. But in this room with this audience, it was a gap I couldn't ignore. I waited for him to finish. Then I leaned forward, hands folded. "Mr. Carter, could you clarify how your rollout accounts for the sub-200 millisecond response requirement outlined in the March directive?" The room shifted. Papers stopped rustling. Someone exhaled, just barely audible. Logan blinked. I can revisit that portion. You'll need to. Our protocols don't allow flexibility there. Please revise and resubmit by the end of business on Thursday. He nodded quickly. Yes, ma'am. There was no humiliation, no sting in my tone, just facts, expectations, accountability, the same I would have offered to anyone else in that chair. We moved on without pause. I transitioned the conversation to a new topic, asked the next director for metrics, and didn't look back at Logan. Not out of cruelty, out of necessity. In that moment, the room stopped seeing me as anyone's sister. I had become what I always was, the officer in charge. By the time the meeting ended, the air was different, less curious, more certain. I had earned my seat without raising my voice, without pointing at the name on the placard, without reminding anyone who I was. They saw it for themselves. I collected my binder, exchanged a few handshakes, and thanked Lorraine as we stood. She smiled at me like she already knew. Outside the glass walls, I caught sight of my father standing alone in the hallway. He looked through the room as if searching for something familiar. But I wasn't the same woman he'd known, and I wasn't going to shrink just to fit his memory. They asked to speak with me as soon as the meeting ended. I followed them down the side hallway into one of the empty offices, my boots quiet on the tile. My mother was already inside, sitting stiffly with her hands clutched around her purse, like she had been bracing for a storm that arrived late. Logan stood near the window, arms folded, his jaw tight, but eyes unsettled. My father hovered near the desk, pacing in slow steps, before finally turning to face me. You've been a colonel for how long? He asked, his voice trying to sound authoritative, but it cracked at the edges. 6 months, I said. He repeated it back like it was a number he didn't recognize. And you didn't tell us I did. I sent invitations, emails, I called, I left messages, I even mailed the program from the promotion ceremony. No one responded. He opened his mouth to speak again, but my mother cut in. We didn't know what that meant. Colonel. It sounded important, but we didn't understand. Why didn't you explain it? Because I got tired of justifying my worth. Every conversation turned into a comparison. Every call started with Logan's metrics and ended with advice about why I should come home. You never asked what I was doing. You never wanted to know. You assumed I was stuck, that I was just following orders. Logan shifted uneasy. We thought you were drifting base to base, no real progress. You said last night that people in the military just take commands. You laughed while saying it. His eyes dropped. I didn't know what you were really doing. You never asked. I said again, quieter now, but no less firm. My mother's face fell. I thought you were keeping us out. I wasn't. I just stopped hoping you'd show up. There was a long silence after that. Thick, real. No one rushed to fill it because finally they heard what had been buried under years of assumptions. My father cleared his throat like he needed to break the tension with something, anything. So what do you want now? Recognition and apology? I looked at him directly. No, I want what I've always wanted. Respect. Not because I fit your blueprint, but because I built my own. That's all. That's always been enough. My father stood in place for a long time, his hands on his hips, eyes down like he was sorting through memories that didn't line up anymore. Then he stepped forward, not as a man trying to control the room, but as someone letting go of something he didn't realize he'd been holding. He extended his hand with a steady grip and a voice quieter than I'd ever heard from him. Colonel Carter, I was wrong about you. I underestimated everything you've built. I looked at his hand for a second before taking it. There was no anger in my chest. No pride either. Just something clean. Like a weight sliding off that was never really mine to carry. My mother blinked fast like she didn't trust her voice yet. She stood slowly and walked closer, her purse still in hand like a shield she wasn't ready to drop. I should have come to your ceremony. I should have framed that picture you sent. I thought you didn't want us to be part of it. I thought you'd close the door. I met her eyes. I never locked it. I just stopped expecting you to knock. She reached for my arm and gave it the smallest squeeze. She didn't say more. She didn't need to. Logan stepped forward next, his usual self-assurance traded for something rawer. You didn't humiliate me in there. You could have, but you didn't. That meant something. I nodded once. I wasn't there to prove a point. I was there to do my job. He paused. You were sharp. You knew more than any of us. You led the room." He gave a half smile that for once didn't feel like it came with a punchline. It was honest. It was enough. The room didn't erupt into hugs. There were no tearful reconciliations or grand declarations, just the quiet realization that something had changed. And not just how they saw me, how they understood themselves. I stepped back, letting the silence settle without needing to fill it. This wasn't a triumph. It wasn't vindication. It was simply the start of something new, built on a truth we had all tried to ignore. Not because I forced it, but because I stopped waiting to be invited into their version of the story and began writing my own, whether they showed up or not. The apartment was quiet before they arrived, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty, just full in a different way. I lit a candle near the window, let the soft scent of cedar mix with the warmth from the kitchen, and checked the oven one last time before pulling off my apron. My place was small by some standards, but it felt like mine in every corner. The bookshelf held awards no one at home had ever asked about. Between cyber defense manuals and a few favourite novels were framed photos from deployment certificates tucked between clean white shelves. Not too much, just enough to say this is who I became. My dad was the first to arrive, which surprised me. He held a rolled-up magazine in one hand and a nervous kind of energy in the other. I opened the door and he handed it to me like it was glass. Figured you might want a copy. It was a feature from a defense publication, a shot of me standing beside the general, and Lorraine, uniform, sharp title bold. He cleared his throat. I've had it in my office for a few months now. I nodded, took it without words, and placed it on the counter. His eyes didn't quite meet mine, but they didn't look away either. That was enough. That was something. Mum followed soon after, carrying a tin covered in a dish towel. Apple pie. Still your favourite, right? I smiled and took it from her hands. The crust was imperfect, a little darker on one edge, and that made it even better. She stepped inside and looked around, her gaze moving slowly across the apartment, like she was seeing something new. It's so clean, she said. So organised. I almost said military habit, but didn't. She was trying, and that didn't need a joke. Logan and his wife arrived last with a bottle of wine. I actually liked this time. He was more relaxed than I expected. Maybe even at ease. We hugged briefly and then turned our attention to the table. My table. Not too formal, but deliberate. Set for 6, but this time I chose the head seat. Dinner was simple. Grilled salmon, roasted vegetables, and warm bread I made that morning. The conversation was lighter than I expected, but it didn't feel shallow. We talked about places I'd been, stories I hadn't told before. They asked questions without correcting my answers. At one point, Logan leaned in. That rollout structure you suggested, we implemented it. The team resisted at first, but now it works better than what we had. I raised an eyebrow. Did you tell them where it came from? He grinned, eventually, after letting them think I was brilliant for 5 minutes. I smirked and shook my head, as long as it works. After dinner, we moved to the living room. Mum brought in the pie and we passed around coffee in mismatched mugs. The conversation slowed but didn't stall. It shifted, became something closer to real. Dad stood near the shelf examining the framed commendations. His eyes paused over one in particular, the citation from the cyber breach interception. I read about that, he said quietly. Didn't realize you were the lead. I was. He nodded once, didn't add more. But he didn't have to. Later that night, as dishes clinked and laughter eased into silence, he raised his glass. To Colonel Emily Carter, who proved your worth isn't in following someone else's path, but in walking your own. No applause followed, just the soft sound of glasses touching and a feeling I hadn't known in that room before. Belonging. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't a movie ending, but it was real, and real was what I needed. No more performing, no more asking to be seen. They saw me now. And more importantly, I saw myself in full at peace, and finally home on my own terms. I used to think the goal was to be seen, that if I worked hard enough, climbed high enough, showed up, polished and prepared, eventually the people who once overlooked me would finally notice. And when they did that, recognition would somehow make it all feel worth it. But standing in that boardroom, hearing my title announced, watching faces shift from confusion to respect, I realized something deeper. That moment didn't make me real. I already was. Long before the placard on the table, long before the nod from my father, I had been building something solid one decision at a time. Success isn't the applause, it's the quiet clarity of knowing you didn't give up when no one was watching. It's showing up for yourself day after day when the validation doesn't come. That's the part no one sees. That's the part that matters most. My family's respect meant something, but it wasn't everything. It didn't erase the years of silence or the moments I questioned my own path. But it reminded me that sometimes when we choose the road less understood, we're not just defying expectations, we're redefining them. I didn't need their approval to become whole, and neither do you. You don't need someone else to name your worth, to validate your choices, to confirm that your direction has meaning. You already have it. You already are it. Value isn't granted, it's lived. It's in the work you do when no one's clapping, the battles you win that never make headlines, the growth you earn that doesn't fit inside a frame on the wall. The real victory is showing up with your whole self even when it would be easier to disappear. If they underestimate you, let them. If they doubt you, stay steady. And when the moment comes, don't try to prove them wrong. Just be undeniable, because the truth is simple, but it changes everything. You don't need permission to matter. You never did.